Hey guys, Pete here. Fargo's Season 4, Episode 9 takes a turn. Overall, I think it was a pretty good thing. It's an Aussian episode. Although Rabbi and Satchel don't actually leave Kansas, they do leave Kansas City. And that sets things up for an episode that's packed with interesting characters, a lot of interesting little details, and the chance to focus on a self-contained story with two of the most interesting characters in this season. Over the last 24 hours, as I've been thinking about it, I'm not sure what it says about the big picture of what's going on, and we can talk about that later, but I did think it was the strongest episode of the season, and I had a lot of fun looking into all the different details that were packed away. So this is your spoiler warning. Of course, this is going to talk about everything that happened in episode 9. If you haven't watched it, if you're not caught up, go and do that. Hit the subscribe button on your way out, then come back and watch the recap and review and join the conversation in the comments. With that out of the way, let's get to it. So episode 9 starts off in color, and we see what's left of a house after it's been destroyed. There's a copy of The History of True Crime in the Midwest, which is a book that we first heard about in Season 2. And the camera focuses in on a page that says, Chapter 7, Liberal, Kansas, 1950. Who shot Willie Booper? When you read the text, you can see that this is a description of what's going to happen at the end of the episode. After that, it shifts to black and white, and we see that Omie's on the road looking for Rabbi. He has a guy named Aldo who works for the Fadda family in the trunk, and he's told him that Constant came looking for guns, that he's out trying to kill a Swede or an Irishman. They pull into a gas station on the side of the road that's basically in the middle of nowhere. Omie asks the attendant if he's seen Constant Calamita pass through. He hasn't seen the man, but he tells him that he probably thinks he'll stop there if he's going that way because it's the only station around. Omie makes a deal with the guy, telling him he'll paint the building if he can hide his car out back and wait. He has Aldo help him, and eventually they go inside to have a Coke and take a break. Aldo tries to bond with him a little bit, saying they have something in common. They both are on the bottom of the ladder. He uses this story of the King of the Turtles who stacks himself on top of his underling so that he can see far and wide. At the same time, Constant pulls up. Aldo tries to take off. Omie shoots him, and then we go back in time one day and catch up with Rabbi and Satchel. We see that they're on the same road. They pass by the same plaque about the discoverer of Pluto that we saw Omie standing by before. They make it to a place called Liberal, Kansas, which we learn is the pancake hub of the universe from the sign, and they pull up at the Barton Arms boarding house with the intention of taking a couple of days to figure out where they're going to go. The Barton Arms is an interesting name. It definitely makes you think about the movie Barton Fink, which also took place in a boarding house, hotel kind of thing. Something I learned when I looked this up, though, was that it's actually the name of an apartment building in Miller's Crossing, and they used it there as a nod to Barton Fink, which they wrote while taking a break on writing Miller's Crossing. Another connection with Barton is the author of the book, The History of True Crime in the Midwest. His name was Barton Brixby. There's another interesting plaque here, this time the marker for the Mellon Mounds. This is about the story of the Mellon family, who had a propensity for taking travelers in and then killing them with a hammer and then burying them near the Barton Arms. The bodies were found, but the Mellons escaped and no one knows what happened to them. After reading this, Rabbi tells Satchel to sleep with one eye open, and that's something that Donatello Fadda told Zero before sending him to live with the Cannons. When they go inside, things continue to get quirkier. The woman behind the counter asks them a series of questions in an effort to figure out where to put them. In that process, we see these photos of women on the back wall. We'll learn that those are sisters who can't get along, so they split the building in half. And if we're thinking about the Wizard of Oz, it has a feeling of the Wicked Witch of the East and the Wicked Witch of the West. We also learn that even though the woman who's working behind the counter is African American, that the sisters don't like black people, and she warns Satchel to avoid them. On the way to their room, they pass by another where there's a man with bandages hooked up to some machines with a younger guy taking care of him, and we'll see these two later. Once they get settled in, Rabbi explains he's got a mission here in town. He leaves him with his knife and he tells him some instructions, and it reinforces that idea of Rabbi doing his best to look out for Satchel in the midst of this crazy situation that they've found themselves in. When he makes it to town, Rabbi realizes the place he stashed his money years ago is no longer there. And when he goes inside, he realizes the wall that it was hidden behind is missing. The new owner has what's basically a furniture appliance store. He explains that him and his brother bought the place at auction. The whole situation throws Rabbi for a loop, so he takes off to think about what his next step is. Back at the room, Satchel hears a noise inside the wardrobe, and he finds a dog named Rabbit, which looks a lot like Toto from The Wizard of Oz. He winds up chasing her downstairs and meets a couple of the guys who are staying in the house. He meets a talkative guy named Hunk, who's really into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and then a younger guy named Hickory, who's headed for Texas to become an oilman. Rabbi returns. He explains that he ran into a setback. He says only a fool thinks the world is going to stay exactly as it was. And then it's time for dinner, where we see the whole cast of characters who stay inside the Barton Arms. The sisters are old, they are eccentric. One of them doesn't want Satchel sitting at the dinner table, but the other one allows him to do so just so she can go against whatever her sister wants. I'll talk a little bit more about the individual characters here later, but what I think is most important about this dinner conversation is this idea about the story of Goldilocks. Hunk says it's the classic example of an outsider in search of himself. And he talks about how the story doesn't really have an ending. The bears get justice, they get rid of the intruder, but Goldilocks herself is left back out in the cold. She doesn't fit anywhere. And that does resemble the situation that Satchel's going to find himself in. The next day starts off with the billboard across the street. We've seen that it says the future is, and we don't know where that's going. Rabbi pulls over to ask the guy, saying that making people live with uncertainty, it ain't right. But the guy who's hanging it, he's more concerned with himself and making this job last because he's soon going to be unemployed. They go back to the store where Rabbi is going to try to get his money back. He leaves Satchel in the car with the dog, and that leads to a tense situation when a police officer sees him and comes up to the car. Inside, the brothers admit that they did find the money, but they spent most of it. So Rabbi gets what they have left, and there's a tense moment where you think that he might kill one of them, and that something might really go wrong with this cop and Satchel, but both situations end up diffused. And I think this is what works really best about this format, where we're only following these two characters. Since we have this idea in the back of our mind that this is a young Mike Milligan, the episode really has this idea that Rabbi could die at any second hanging over it. Back at their room, Rabbi tells them they're going to leave, and he doesn't want to bring Rabbit. This brings up the idea that Satchel's sad because he wanted just one thing for his birthday, which is today. This is the first that Rabbi heard of that, so he goes downstairs trying to find something to give him, like a cupcake or a candy bar. Turns out the sisters don't believe in sugar, so the woman at the counter sends him down to the filling station, and everything comes together where we realize that that's probably where Omie and Calamita were when we last saw them. On his way, Rabbi sees the now completed billboard, and it says the future is now. He's not impressed, so he talks to the guy again, who says, I don't know, maybe it's about the unreliability of time, or maybe it's a seize the day type message. Either way, the future that this guy was worried about has arrived. He is now unemployed, and I did like this quite a bit. Rabbi gets to the service station. We see that it is the same one. We see that there are storm clouds gathering. We see the attendant's feet sticking outside of the door. His striped socks seem like a reference to the Wicked Witch, although he's not wearing ruby slippers. After seeing the body, Rabbi approaches with caution. Through the window, he sees Omie on the ground, shot, with Constant standing over him. He makes a noise, which Constant hears. That sends him outside after him, after taking a couple shots. Rabbi gets hit in the shoulder as he's trying to reach safety behind his car. As Constant's readying himself to finish him off, Omie comes with one shot left and shoots Constant, and then without bullets, he's dispatched. Rabbi's having trouble because he's been shot. He can't actually raise his gun up. He starts to get it together, but the wind's so bad that a piece of wood flies through the air and hits him. And as it looks like Constant's going to finish him off, the tornado arrives. It sweeps him up. The station starts breaking apart. Rabbi's car is gone. Rabbi realizes he's not going to get away. So there's this great shot of him where he just sort of raises his arms up and he goes up into the sky. Back at the room, Satchel had fallen asleep. He wakes up, doesn't know what's going on, and he walks through the door of the bedroom where we see the black and white disappear and the color come back into the scene. He goes next door where we saw the guy that was wrapped in bandages. And this time he talks to him and he has a healthy fear of this situation. I read somewhere that what he's saying comes from the book of Revelations. And now that we can see his face, we see that this is actually the same actor, Ira Amix, who played Rabbi's father, the leader of the Irish gang. He freaks Satchel out, he goes back to the room, barricades himself in, and then falls asleep for the night. The next morning, he wakes up. He's had it reinforced to him several times that if he doesn't see Rabbi, that means he's dead or in jail. Although it's interesting that this is the one time he left and he didn't actually say that to him. But he knows that he has to leave, and he does. He stops to look at the billboard. The future is now, and I guess in a way it is for him. The character has transformed into something new. And the episode ends there. So like I was saying, I do think this is the best episode. That doesn't mean that I don't have a ton of questions about what actually happened. And I spent a lot of time looking at these different details and trying to tie it all together, coming to the conclusion that I don't really know. There's a lot here that's still sort of open-ended. When I watched it the first time, the one problem I had was at the end. I was so invested in this journey. It felt so tight, like a self-contained story, so I had the expectation that there would be a definitive answer. Of course, I was thinking this was going to be that we're going to see that Satchel becomes Mike Milligan. And as I watched him walk down the road, I thought this isn't a great ending for this character. He's just a kid. But I realized that it's actually the ending of Rabbi's story. Of course, we lose other characters. We lose Omie and we lose Constant, but it really is the end of Rabbi's story. It's up for debate whether you like the idea of the tornado or not. There had been some foreshadowing that something like this was coming. Dr. Senator mentioned a tornado. In the beginning of the very first episode, we saw a janitor at Ethelrida's school cleaning some graffiti of a tornado off the wall. So generally speaking, I'm all right with it. As far as the big picture and about Satchel's story, I don't think we've seen the end of it yet. It's not clear how this is going to affect the main story because we don't know what's going to happen with him. Technically, if you think about it, he's a kid. So the most likely thing that would happen to him is he would try to make it home to his parents. If we don't think he's going to die, if we think he's going to be Mike Milligan, then somehow he's going to survive. And while we see he's in a dangerous situation, we have to take into consideration that Rabbi had been preparing him the best that he could. The big questions of things I can't answer are things like, where did the dog come from? What is that supposed to mean? Why was the page from the book Who Shot Willie Booper in the aftermath of the tornado that led to the story that it's describing? Is that a hint at something more? Or is it just a clever device to give us some exposition? It says that 5 bodies were recovered, at least 4 died of gunshot wounds, which would be Constant, Aldo, Omie, and the attendant. And then Rabbi had been shot, but maybe he didn't die from that. Maybe he died from the tornado itself. Same thing with the guy next door, using the same actor that played Rabbi's dad. Is this just a reference to the curse that he was talking about in his last minutes? Or is that supposed to be a hint at something more? Also, we have all these strange characters staying in this boarding house. Are they just there to be interesting characters, or are we supposed to read more into that? I mean, there's a lot of Wizard of Oz references. I think you could assign the roles of the characters that Dorothy meets in The Wizard of Oz to these guys. But I mean, we see this really weird pastor who's traveling with his mother that everyone thought was his wife. They're folding up a flag. Got this old guy who's a veteran. He's with what he refers to as his niece, but she doesn't talk to him that way. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. It's also interesting that they used that quote from Bertram Russell in the very beginning. This is not something they usually do. What we saw on screen was that life is nothing but a competition to be the criminal rather than the victim. And if you read this in the context of the letter that he wrote to his lover that it's taken from, there's another line there that says, people seem good while they're oppressed, but then they only wish to become oppressors in their turn. So all of that makes sense for the overarching themes of the season, but I'm not really sure how that ties into the episode we just watched. So it will be interesting to see how that all ties together. There's 2 episodes to go. We got a lot of stuff going on. I think this was a strong setup for the ending, so I hope they can pull it all off. As mentioned, I'm interested to hear what you guys think, so tell me in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.